Αξιότιμη κυρία Πρέσβης, αγαπημένοι φίλοι και φίλες, και βλέπω ότι είσαστε πάρα πολύ εδώ, είναι ιδιαίτερη χαρά και τιμή να δώσω μία διάλεξη στο Upper House Seminar και θέλω ειλικρινά να ευχαριστήσω από καρδιά στον Διευθυντή της Βρετανικής Αρχαιολογικής Σχολής, καθηγητή John Bennett, για την πρόσκλησή του και για τα ωραία του λόγια. Επειδή οι μεγάλες αγάπες δεν ξεχνιούνται όσα χρόνια και να περάσουν, σήμερα θα σας μιλήσω πάλι για πειθάρια και για την αποθήκευση. Για τα πειθάρια και την αποθήκευση σε ένα σημαντικό χώρο του προϊστορικού Αιγαίου, αυτό της Κνωσσού. At the dawn of the 20th century, Sir Arthur Evans excavated the palace of King Minos and linked his name with the discovery of a hitherto unknown civilization. The size of the complex, its unique in many respects architectural layout, the quality of construction, and its impressive pictorial decoration make the palace a landmark in the history of ancient architecture. Despite the imposing names bestowed on them by the ingenious excavator, the precise use of the various spaces of the palace is unknown, mainly due to the absence of good floor deposits. The most striking exception is that of the West Magazines, the only area of the palace on the floor of which were found significant artifactual assemblages associated with its final days. Originally discovered by Kalokerinos in 1879, who fully excavated one of them, the West Magazines were systematically excavated by Evans and Mackenzie from 1900 to 1903, with additional investigation in 1923. They were constructed during the 17th century, perhaps following the layout of an earlier structure, and destroyed at the end of the 14th century. During the 4th centuries of their use, the West Magazines were subject to complex architectural modifications that affected storage capacities and patterns of circulation, and beyond any doubt, reflected shifts in the political economy of the Knossian state. This seminar is based on the results of an ongoing research project whose aim is the final publication of the storage areas of the Palace of Knossos and the investigation of the political, social, economic, and ideological implications of the storage strategies adopted by the Knossian political leadership. Some of what you are about to hear has already been published in my previous work, while some is the result of recent research presented for the first time here. The West Magazines were formed of 80 long, narrow storerooms laid along a long corridor. The complex was accessible from the inside of the palace from both ends of the long corridor, while doorways in the east wall of the corridor gave access to the ground floor of the central palace sanctuary and the rooms north of it. The quality of construction, including walls dressed with gypsum slabs and plaster, gypsum paving, and the absence of windows, would provide an ideal environment for the long-term storage of goods. The complex was probably designed to hold about 420 large pithoi. On the basis of some 550 liters as the average capacity of a large late Minoan Knossian pithos, the total amount in the complex might have been 231,000 liters. Please note that these are only estimates because we don't know the actual number of pithoi that once was kept in the West Magazines during the New Palace period. The capacity of the stores was increased by 93 cysts sunk into the floor of the long corridor and most of the magazines. These constructions could store about 90,000 liters of goods. The West magazines were the main but not the only storage sector of the palace. Areas devoted to storage were in the ground floor of the central palace sanctuary, in the long storerooms to the south of the throne room, and in the east wing. Peripheral complexes built close to the palace, such as the Northeast House, increase the capital managed by the ruling elite. The largest neopalatial pithoi so far excavated at Knossos were kept there. The possibility of additional storage in the predecessor of the arsenal, alongside the Royal Road, associated in its later phase with palatial storage through its linear B tablets, could not be excluded. We could also add the Northwest Treasure House as another possible palatial storehouse. According to Todd Whitelaw, the enigmatic not domestic structures excavated along the south side of the Royal Road by Hood and Warren and identified by the latter as grandstands might represent storerooms like the Bastione at Agia Triada. Together, these would make much of the northern area of the palace and its ceremonial access along the Royal Road a display of palatial wealth and power. Extensive architectural modifications in the West magazines occurred after a fire destruction at an early phase of late Minoan 3A, 1375 in absolute terms, and are widely discussed by Gallagher. A new gypsum floor was laid above the cyst of the long corridor. Many cysts within the magazines were either rebuilt and made smaller or completely closed. Buttress walls were rebuilt in order to reinforce the upper floor level. The walls were plastered over with painted stucco, and the entrance in each magazine and the access to the whole complex were rearranged. About 151 entirely and partly preserved pithoi were found sitting on the floor of the West magazines. This number is considerably lower than the actual number of pithoi that the stores were designed to hold. It is impossible to know whether storage vessels of perishable materials were used alongside the pithoi. Of these, 104 examples are almost complete, although many are very restored. The rest are in a very fragmentary state of preservation. Most pithoi are ovoid in shape, some piriform, while 4 larger examples have a conical body profile. They are decorated with relief patterns applied following quite complex arrangements. The jars were made in a variety of local fabrics typical of North Central Crete. The exception is a pithos imported from the Pediada, from the plain of Pediada. Traces of the forming process point to a technology almost identical to that used by traditional potters in pre-industrial Crete. Different in their formal and technological attributes are 3 pithoi placed in Magazine 9, which have been imported from the mainland Greece. Despite the variety of shapes and decorative patterns, a variety that makes the Knossian pithoi the most impressive assemblage of storage containers in pre-industrial, prehistoric Aegean and beyond, a deeper analytical approach reveals groups of pithoi with coherent interlinkages between clay technology, construction, formal and decorative attributes. The discussion that follow presents some significant cases. The first includes three pithoi. The shape of the body is similar, with minor differences in the shape of the rim and handles. They are decorated with the same relief pattern, though arranged in a slightly different syntax. Circular impressions made using the same stamp were pressed against horizontal or wavy bands. Similar in fabric, manufacture, decoration, but slightly different in their shape of rim and the lower part of the body, are two pithoi from magazine 6. The case of two pithoi from magazine 5 is very important. The pithoi are identical in all formal and technological attributes, except the relief decoration around the base, imitating arched lines in the first and foliated band in the second. The horizontal band above the lower row of handles, with concentric circle impressions in the first and herringbone impressions in the second, and the stamp producing rosette-like imprints pressed on the lower horizontal bands of one of them. The concentric circle imprints in both examples were made by the same stamp. The large pithos decorated with medallion in relief from magazine 5 is a fine example of a very distinctive group of Knossian storage jars. Another example was placed in magazine 10, 7 others in magazine of the medallion pithoi in the east wing of the palace, and some fragmentary examples in the house of the channel screen. Despite minor differences, all these pithoi share similar formal and decorative attributes, clay and forming technologies. The same coherent interlinkages between formal, decorative, and technological attributes are observed in another group of pithoi, 3 from magazine 9 and 4 from magazine 11. The distinctive features of this pithoi, beside their ovoid, slightly depressed body, is a peculiar type of raised band with vertical or herringbone incisions impressions. This type of band is found only in the Knossian area. A different case is that of another group of pithoi, 6 from magazine 9 and 1 from magazine 11, and another from the great pithos room of the central palace sanctuary. The size and profile of the ovoid body differed slightly from case to case, but the relief motifs, consisting of horizontal and wavy raised bands, ropes with crisscross incisions, and medallions, form different combinations. Common features in all these pithoi are the clay technology and the raised band with very thin incisions carefully made with a sharp tool. Consistent patterns of correlations between paste technology, construction, surface treatment, decoration, and basic formal attributes among certain groups of pithoi lead us to believe that these examples, as well as many others not discussed here, were produced by a single potting group. I here define a potting group as a group of potters who follow predetermined mental templates shaped on the one hand by ceramic traditions passed down from generation to generation, and on the other by the demands, practical and symbolic, of their clientele. Coherence of variance is not always constant, and subtle differences are observed in formal and decorative features. Forming and paste technology and surface treatment are identical in all the examples of each group. Differences, however, do not change the overall picture of homogeneity. The pithoi resemble each other and differ from those produced by the other groups. Divergence is mostly seen in the combination of decorative motifs, which, although the same, were applied following a slightly different logic, often only recognizable through following thorough observation. It is argued here that the minor differences are due to the mood of the moment of the potter who reproduced the same prototype in a slightly different way. The distribution of this pithoi within the West magazines is also of special interest. The pithoi of each potting group, were mostly placed next to each other, either in the same or in two different stores. Where the pithoi of a single group were placed in two stores, most of them tended to be in one of the two. It is worth noting the case of the two pithoi from Magazine 5, produced by the same potter, which were placed on either side of a large medallion pithos in an almost heraldic arrangement. The tendency to group the pots together cannot be coincidental. It indicates, in my view, the great importance attributed by the potting groups to the spatial segregation of their output in a context imbued with high sociopolitical symbolism. The data also indicates the presence of other potting groups and even individual potters responsible for furnishing the palace after the late Minoan 3A destruction with newly made pithoi. The output of these groups differs not so much in terms of clay technology and manufacture, but mostly in terms of formal attributes. For all its variety, the production of these potters stands out for its exceptional quality and its complex, elaborate decoration. The Gnossian pithoi are the work of experienced potters who, using great skill and ingenuity, combine unique decorative motifs to create alluring vessels. The manufacturing use of richly decorated pithoi is part of a targeted strategy of ostentatious display of stored wealth adopted by the various political groups controlling the fate of the Gnossian state. Storage containers and buildings in many civilizations are markers of economic status par excellence. Pithoi, especially those of large size and elaborate manufacture, are precious tokens, the possession of which is not as widespread as one might argue. We need only to consider the striking effect on a visitor who would have moved from the rooms of the east side of the West Wing through labyrinthine corridors to the dark West magazines, and walking along the long corridor, have seen the storerooms full of richly ornamented pithoi. The air of mystery, the smells, the flickering lamplight, distorting rather than clearly illuminating the pithoi and building, would have fired visitors' imagination as to the quantity of the stored wealth and the power of the political authority capable of gathering, storing, and administrating them. The size of the storerooms and the use of large pithoi show the intensification of production, collection, processing, and storage of agricultural capital during the Neo-Palatial period. Storage is the cornerstone of domestic and state economies. The development of any form of institution presupposes access to an uninterrupted supply of goods. This intensification matches the tremendous economic stress as a consequence of the exceptional growth of Knossos after the Protopalatial period. The Knossian population was to reach 30,000 souls. Knossos is the largest urban center in Bronze Age Greece and one of the largest in Eastern Mediterranean. This size created novel social opportunities in a highly competitive social mix generated by the differentiated population of elites, administrators, service personnel, and highly specialized artisans. This social pressure cooker, not witnessed again in any Aegean community for nearly a millennium, will have been an incubator for cultural innovation. This dynamic social context almost certainly drove what we tend to view as the high point of Aegean Bronze Age culture, with its unparalleled diversification and elaboration of material culture. I think that all you agree with this amazing find, a product perhaps of a Cretan workshop, perhaps Knossia. So, feeding the population of Knossos and storing goods beyond their productive season would have required more complex hierarchical organization to move substantial quantities of food into the city from dependent communities. It has been calculated that in order for the inhabitants of Knossos to meet their dietary needs, they would have needed arable land 2.5 times the size of the Knossian Valley. During the Neopalatial period, the territory necessary to support Knossos was expanded into the fertile plain of the Pediada. It was argued that the Palace of Galatas was established through Knossian initiative. The survey of the surrounding landscape documents the establishment of a settlement system focused on the palatial center at the same time as the palace was built. The abandonment or downgrading of the palace in late Minoan seems likely to represent a significant change in the administrative relationship with Knossos, perhaps a shift in second-order centers as the Knossian territory continued to expand. Knossian political influence must have extended into the fertile plain of the Messara. It has been argued that its administrative center, Agia Triada, was created as a result of the Knossian intervention. Such an intervention may also explain the changes observed in the domain of Malia, where there is a dramatic fall in the number of settlements during the Neopalatial period, and even further afield as at Zakros. Peripheral centers on major road arteries control the movement of goods from the periphery to the center. Here, it is worth noting the case of the central complex at Sfendili, now lying beneath the waters of the Aposselemis reservoir. Almost all of the pithoi placed in the North magazines are similar to those used in the Knossos area, rather than those found at Malia and Galatas, contrary to what we would expect given the proximity of these regions to Sfendili. The fact that those who used the building chose to stock it with pithoi imitating Knossian counterparts is very significant. Pithoi are symbols of wealth in their own right due to their use for storage. The form and style of storage containers, therefore, can be viewed as one of the several means of communication through which individuals and social groups define relationships and associations. Testimonies shows that changes in the storage strategies of the Knossian administration occurred during the last phase of the monopolatial period. The capacity of the West magazines falls significantly with the complete disuse of a large number of cysts and the drop in the capacity of others. The pithoi in use before the final destruction are far fewer than the storerooms were designed to contain. While part of the complex may have fallen into disuse, meanwhile, the overall architectural layout has changed with reduced access and slightly rougher construction. If I am reading the archaeological data right, it is likely that the needs of the state in terms of stored capital within the palace itself had decreased. Let us not forget that the monopolatial period is a time when the Knossian center shrinks, its population falling from 30,000 souls to 12,000. At the same time, Knossian hegemony extends across the whole island, with the exception of the easternmost end. The need for storage and ostentatious consumption of capital in a continuous struggle for the establishment and maintenance of political power in an extremely changeable political scene like that of the previous period may have been reduced. Most staples controlled by the palace, as shown by textual evidence, seem to have been stored in peripheral centers close to the places of their production, consumption, and exportation. But what could the pithoi tell us about the final days of the Knossian palace? It has been suggested that destruction by fire in an early phase of late Minoan 3A overtook the west wing and affected the West magazines. The fire would obviously have damaged the pithoi, since given the extent of the architectural modifications necessary to repair the complex and support the upper floor, and the layers of burnt material below the latest floor, especially in the area of magazines 11, 12, and 13, it must have been a very destructive event. We have only to think the melted pithoi in the stores of the palace at Archanes to imagine the damage a fire could do to the pithoi in a storeroom, especially if their contents were flammable. Surprisingly though, the pithoi found in the magazines bear no signs of fire damage or even burnt marks. There are only 7 examples with burn marks on their lower body, caused, in my view, by contact with carbonized debris and not by fire. This picture raised 2 serious implications. First, it indirectly implies that most pithoi placed in the stores were made after the early late Minoan 3A destruction, since otherwise we could expect to find many pithoi with traces of the conflagration that struck the complex. To clarify, I believe that the pithoi in the West magazines, except for few examples, were made within the time span of 50 years, from around 1375 to 1325, or in human terms, within a generation. Moving a step further, I will suggest that most, but certainly not all, were made in the very first years of the period. The need to provide new replacement pithoi to meet the storage requirements of the central administration would have been especially pressing in the first years following the late Minoan 3A destruction. Second, and following the same line of thought, the final conflagration that destroyed the state rooms above the magazines in 1325 and caused the breaking of the linear B archive did not extend through the ground floor area. It is generally argued that the last palace of Knossos was destroyed by an extensive fire, to use Colin MacDonald's works in his admirable synthesis of the Knossian palace. The destruction, when it came, was ferocious, consuming much of the palace in a great conflagration whose only benefit was the baking of the palace clay records. Flaming timbers and other flammable debris may have fallen into the west magazines from the upper stories, but they certainly did not cause an extensive blaze in the storerooms. Might the west magazines, the economic pride of the Knossian Wanaks, not have been filled in with the new harvest? Had they been empty before the place went up in flames? What exactly happened in the last day or days before the destruction of the palace of King Minos? Thank you for your attention.